Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Paratalk. And on this episode, something a little bit different, but not different, but different. I've got Stephen and Dave with me, and for some of you out there, you're already going to know who these guys are. But if you were a young person in the 70s, the 80s growing up, and you were kind of into sci-fi and horror and all that stuff, then Scarred for Life, the book, is going to be on your shelf. I'm sure it is. So, Dave and Steve, welcome to Paratalk.
Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
That's all right. Now, I'm going to start with you, Steve, because I have a little bit of a question, and I'm going to hand it to you first, and then I'm going to jump to Dave. How did this book come about? Because it's a really peculiar book. Because I mean, give the listeners sort of an idea of where this came from and how it all came together.
Right. Well, basically, I worked in a branch of Forbidden Planet here in Liverpool for 23 years, up until a couple of years ago. Dave, I always do this at our live shows. I was about to say our oldest customer. He's our longest standing customer. My pleasure, Dave. He was there before I started working there in 1997. So Dave was there from day one, essentially. And as you do, you kind of get to know certain customers and they become a friend of the shop, and then they just become your friend. It was one morning in work. It was really quiet. There was nothing to do. So there's me, Dave was in, and my mate Col, who I was working with that morning. We just got into one of those conversations that friends get into. You know, I kind of, do you remember that film? Oh, did you used to read that comic? Or, do you remember that TV show? Remember those toys? And that kind of went on, just being nostalgic about the 70s and 80s. And it was only at the end of the conversation when, say, a delivery came in and me and Col had to get back to work that I realised that, and I'm not exaggerating, every single thing we talked about, every film, every comic, every TV show, sweets even, were all supernatural or horror themed or violent, shocking, scary, occasionally racist, some of the sitcoms, and most of them were aimed at children. And I just got really fired up. I wanted to read the book about this era, not just a nostalgia book about the 70s and 80s. I wanted to read one specifically about the dark pop culture, the dark side of growing up in that time. And I couldn't find one. I was absolutely gobsmacked. I just assumed there would be a spate of these books. Couldn't find any on Amazon, any in Waterstones, any booksellers, anywhere. And it just struck me that no one had written it. So the next day in work, I was again talking to my mate Col. And he said, well, you like writing, you enjoy it. Why don't you write the book? And I literally laughed in his face. But I went home, got a notebook, started making notes, started making a list of subjects. And I thought, well, I can do it as a hobby, on and off. Probably won't happen. Then I really got into it. I thought, no, this is a good idea, this. I remember after a week of getting notes together and getting the list of subjects together, realizing what an enormous Titanic task this was going to be.
Yeah.
Dave was in the following week. And I said to Dave, you've always been interested in writing yourself as a hobby. I said, well, do you want to join up? Do you want to write this book? We probably won't finish it, but it'll be a laugh. It'll be something to do. Obviously, Dave said, yeah. And we did. We broke through that wall. We thought, no, we're going to do this. Because we had that many of our friends saying what a great idea it was. You kind of talk to your mates and go, well, that's striking a chord. That's striking a nerve with our generation. So, I mean, it took us 3.5 years, Dave?
3.5 long years, yeah.
Yeah, of research, writing, watching TV shows, reading comics, so much research. And Volume 1 came out in March 2017. And that was the thing. This is it, Dave. I always said to you, if we manage to sell 200 copies in my lifetime, I'll be overwhelmed. I'll be made up. What was it again? What was it we did?
It was, you said if we sell 200, that'd be amazing. And I said, oh, well, let's sell 1,000. And I was the wild optimist of the group. And we're currently at around 11,000 copies sold.
That's crazy.
So I'm doing live comedy shows. There's loads of other projects we can't really talk about. A couple, I'd say it embargoed, Dave.
I'd say, there's one very big one, isn't there? There's one quite prestigious. We can't talk about it.
This is the thing. It's genuinely struck a chord. Yeah. Because if you're of a certain age, I don't want to say old, but if you're of a certain age, you remember certain things. But it's. I mean, we know it's a weird time to grow up with in anyone who was there. But after writing these 2 books with a third on the way, it's more apparent to me and Dave, and I guess everyone who's read them, more apparent than ever. What a bizarre 20, 25 years that was.
I have an understanding of what's in the book, and I know that it's very child-centric, as in growing up, but if you think back and you put everything together like you've done, it's more of an encyclopedia of growing up in the 70s and 80s. I think that when you look at the children's programs, and this is my other question, which I'm gonna throw this over to Dave, but do you think that when you look back and you've got all these stories, you've done your research, do you kind of step back a minute and go, wow, there was a very kind of a cloak of the occult with some of these children's programs where everything was very supernatural but very dark as well at the same time? Did you find that?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, you just have to look at some of the programs. I mean, Rent a Ghost.
Yeah.
I mean, the premise of that show is incredibly dark. Fred Mumford is a man who has died. He's drowned. His body has never been found. So his parents don't know he's dead. So basically, you've got Fred Mumford there with his actual corpse somewhere under the sea being eaten by the fish, which I think is an incredibly dark premise.
Yeah.
For a kid show. The Ghosts of Motley Hall, quite a lot of the, again, a light-hearted kid show where the premise is that all these people have died in terrible circumstances. They've broken their necks, they've drowned down wells, they've died of consumption, whatever. But there's a lot of programs where the central premise is the dead. There's one called Nobody's House, I think. That was a Tyne Tees one. There's so many of them. I mean, and obviously in the 70s, people were watching stuff like Randall and Hopkirk Deceased.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and quite a lot of the, like Sweets, like Treebore Mummies with the tales of ghosts and horrors on the inside of the wrappers. We were just surrounded, immersed in this paranormal culture. It touched every aspect of our childhood lives, I'd say.
You wrote the big piece about Children of the Stones in Volume 1.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the most occult. It's just full-on adult folk horror.
As a children's show, it's actually really complex. I mean, watching it as an adult, I had to have like a piece of paper to write down so I could follow through what's actually happening, because it's obviously a time loop thing. But a lot of they don't talk down to kids. I think that's the thing you've got to you take from this, that they don't talk down to kids. They made the programs they wanted to make, and the kid with some fairly mature themes, and that was just the reality of our childhoods, I think.
Children of the Stones. If you were playing cards and you had Children of the Stones cards, like a top trumps, the only thing it could beat that for being complicated would be something like Sapphire and Steel, because when that came out and I watched that as a child, I had absolutely no clue what was going on, but it was intriguing.
I don't think many.
No, the stories were completely bizarre, but as a child I was completely. I mean, I've still got the box set now, and I recently watched it, and I'm like thinking, no, I still don't know what's going on. It's
quite a high concept idea, especially for like 7 o'clock, 7:30 on a weekday night. When you just go down after your tea, and then suddenly you've got this idea of these two sort of time agents, whatever they are, just battling time itself. I think again,
and it doesn't ever go into the lore. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah, it gives you the pieces, and you can put most of it together yourself, but you don't know who their bosses are, who Sapphire and Steel are working for. And you do meet other agents, and they've got a history. They know each other, they're friends, and it's almost like you're always seeing only half of the story. And I think that was part of its appeal for me. It was just so, like you said, I could follow the stories just about.
Yeah, you could follow them, but it was that kind of backstory that you didn't.
There's like a logic to it, isn't it? With like clocks and mirrors and things like that. You've kind of got to piece together what the rules are for that.
Mm.
It was almost like Twin Peaks style before Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks is very similar. There's a law and there are rules to the Twin Peaks universe, but only David Lynch knows what they are, and he lets you know in bits and pieces. And I think this is the thing, Dave. You just mentioned it was on at 7 o'clock in the afternoon, the evening, and that was that kind of give us a clue, name that tune slot.
It'd be on just before suddenly, or something like that,
But that's it, before Coronation. Sapphire and Steel, followed by Coronation.
You cannot imagine that kind of left turn of the lights into surreal drama, can you, these days? I don't, you're not going to get that. That was only in the 70s and the 80s that you got stuff like that, where it's just so experimental and weird and just out there.
I'm gonna ask Stephen this, but do you think that you noticed, you touched on something there, Dave, that is interesting, that when they bring out these shows and they bring out these stories, do you think, and I'll direct this to Stephen, do you think that it's important that, because back then that they didn't have a lot of money for budgets and stuff, do you think that they had to make a good story, they had to make it interesting, they had to make it like you didn't want to get out of your seat, because there was no money for a set, for everything was made of cardboard, and they had to make a good story to make it worthwhile, make it you watch it?
Well, I think I don't know if it's so much that they had to, but I know whenever Doctor Who came up in the 1970s and the 80s, it was always in competition with Star Wars. Star Wars changed everything.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because that was the big blockbuster.
Yeah.
Suddenly special effects were at the forefront. And you can't compete on a BBC budget, or an ITV budget for that matter. But I think it was just the style of the times. Television in the 70s was still very much in a kind of televised theatre mode.
Yes.
That it was starting to come out of in the 1980s. It was starting to become more filmic and cinematic, but a lot of it was the bare minimum of sets and people speaking very clearly and very loudly and very stagily. But I think story-wise, I think it was just the way things are. That was another thing we found when we were researching the books, Dave. A lot of these TV shows we already knew about, we grew up with, or we'd read about at least. And there's a few that we stumbled across that we'd never heard of in our lives. There's one called Shadows of Fear that I knew nothing about. I just stumbled across it on the internet one evening and thought, that sounds interesting. Bought the DVD box set in a sale. It's an anthology psychological horror thriller series. One of the best things I've seen in years. There's not a bad episode. It's stunning. But it fell through the cracks because it was just another brilliant TV show in a raft of brilliant TV shows. I think people talk about a golden age of television, and I can't speak for everyone else, but I think me and Dave, we certainly kind of think, well, it is, but we've been there, we've done that. I, Claudius, The Sweeney, God knows how many incredible, beautifully written TV shows. I don't know that it's that they had to be brilliant. They just were.
So I think as well, one of the issues is the cameras weren't as mobile back then as they are now, so it had to be quite stagey.
Yeah, that's true.
They couldn't move the cameras around. Like obviously nowadays with Steadicam and things like that, you can move around and be more kinetic with things. The cameras being fixed in position essentially means that you had to be stagey, you had to be on one set. And so when you've got those limitations, the dialogue naturally comes to the fore.
It's to do with television itself, which all changes in the 1980s, because now in the 80s you've got there's a portable in every room.
Yeah.
You've got video recorders, so you've got the option of going out and then watching that TV show tomorrow and watching it again and again and again. In the 1970s, we've got 3 channels, so there isn't as much anxiety, I think, from TV companies that someone's going to switch over, because there's probably opera on BBC Two. There's probably a really terrible sitcom on ITV. So BBC can kind of relax and go, well, we can just tell a brilliant story without having to bombard people with, I don't know, cliffhangers or twists or whatever. Whereas now everything's fragmented. I think there is more of a clamour. You have to watch this. You must binge this now.
Yeah.
Whereas we could just chill out and watch Sapphire and Steel and go into school the next day and go, did you see it? Did anyone understand it? No. But wasn't it brilliant?
But the pacing's totally different in those 70s dramas.
Oh, completely.
Like you say, because like Steve says, you've got to capture the attention now, because there's 100 more channels there waiting for you to switch to them. So nowadays, it's far more pow, pow, pow. Here's a story. You hit the ground running with stories now. But I think you could definitely say that, for example, Sapphire still is slow build.
Yeah.
It's atmosphere. It's pure atmosphere. And another issue is, again, because you couldn't record stuff, you go to school the next day, like Steve said. And what would happen is you'd retell the stories in school, and it would be mythologized in that way, and it would become possibly even scarier than it was.
Embellished a little bit as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Wasn't there a Doctor Who story, Dave, that you...
The Seeds of Doom, where at the end the guy falls, don't spoil for anybody, but then at the end the guy falls into a compost machine and gets chopped to pieces. Now I remember the blood, the screams, everything. None of that is there because my young mind invented that scene.
Yeah.
So in my head, so like Sapphire and Still, things like Doctor Who, in many ways were scarier in my head than they ever were on the screen. And I think that's an issue as well. I think, you know, because you couldn't like wind the video back and watch it again. You couldn't get the DVD off the shelf and freeze frame. Your experience was at the time, it was very in the moment. And then your memories would play tricks on you sometimes. So it'd be even scarier than you thought it was. It really, really was. Though.
So I'm going to throw this out there, and it leads on quite nicely. We're talking about TV shows and how growing up with TV shows and, you know, the stuff that children would watch, basically. How do you think that in the late 70s, we're talking about the late 70s, is a kind of it is a kind of golden age for TV shows, and you know, video recorders are very new, and if you've got one, you're very lucky. But how do you think that the advent of American TV, like for example, The $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, Man from Atlantis, Gemini Man, how do you think those TV shows kind of changed the way that, you know, as a kid, it's like it's a new wave of TV shows. How do you think that they sort of changed the way that we sort of looked at TV and sort of enjoyed it as a child?
I think initially they drew the attention, didn't they? I think because it's a shiny new thing, better production wise. I think in the end though, possibly the lack of the depth of script, I think you went back to the things you love. I mean, I think Steve tells the story that you got distracted by Buck Rogers away from Doctor Who.
I did, but I went back to Doctor Who.
Exactly, because you get, okay, yeah, the production values are better, the spandex is tighter on Rummadiering, that kind of, but you go back because there's just a brilliant idea at the core of Doctor Who, or you go back because the British drama thing triumphs at the end of the day because of the strength of those stories, because of the strength of those characters. I think a lot of those American shows you mentioned, they kind of fade a bit.
Yeah.
In the memory. Yeah. I mean, people come to our shows and they'll never say, "Oh, do you remember that big thing in the Bionic Woman?" No, hardly anybody ever says that.
No, it's true. Actually, I've never thought of that, Dave. No one mentions American shows until the 80s. Salem's Lot and V.
Yeah.
But no one
David
ever
Soul,
mentions. Oh, do you remember? Yeah.
Oh, do you remember that episode of The Man from Atlantis? Never.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely
because
never.
British shows were always a lot darker and a lot more complex. And there were ramifications that never happened in America. That's what turned me off American shows when I was a kid. I got so excited by The $6 Million Man and Starsky and Hutch and the Gemini Man. And I understand it now. I understand it in my 20s. There's the syndication thing where they make so many episodes, then it goes into syndication. So the cable channels could just pluck a tape off the shelves at random.
Yep.
So there are no ramifications. There are no consequences to these shows. Everything resets at the end of 45 minutes. I remember an episode of Starsky and Hutch. It's not very paranormal, but I remember the first 5 minutes that Hutch comes into the squad room with his fiancée that he's been going out with for a year. And even as a kid, I went, what? She's never been in it before. And then she gets killed and he's grieving. She's never mentioned again for the rest of the series.
Yeah.
If that was a British show, even in the 70s, that character would probably have been built up.
Yeah.
And her death would have meant something, even if just for an episode or two.
I mean,
I think that's the thing.
George Carter's wife in Sweeney, I think. She was in a couple of episodes before she was bumped off. And then you see the effect on him in a few episodes later on as well. Yeah.
So you've got all these supernatural shows. A lot of our shows were... you wouldn't call them series, you'd call them serials. They were finite. They were 6 episodes and out. So you knew things like Children of the Stones and Sky, King of the Castle, Shadows. Man, talk about the Occult.
Shadows,
I don't know if you remember this. Incredible children's anthology, supernatural anthology show from the 1970s. Just brilliant ghost, occult, witchcraft shows. And a lot of them, you kind of just about slide a cigarette paper between them and similar adult dramas. The only thing missing was kind of blood and swearing.
Yeah.
But you could put a lot of those shows past the watershed and you wouldn't bat an eyelid.
There was a show, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was a series, it was an episode of a series of shows, Gareth, my late colleague, he was well into sort of early sort of 70s horror. He had a massive library, and he used to send me like, oh, look at this show, look at that show, and he sent me a link to a show, and it was a group of kids who believed that the old man that dug the graves in the graveyard was a vampire, and it was called Vampires, the show. And,
Play for Today.
Yeah,
it's a Play for Today.
Play for Today. That's it. Yeah.
Last month, it's set in Liverpool.
That's right. Yeah.
Proper Scouse actors. It's amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. It's a kid who comes from a really troubled home.
That's right.
Like his stepdad's sound, but his mum's a bit of an alcoholic.
Yeah, but
never there for him.
Yeah.
So he retreats into this fantasy world, and he sees this kind of gravedigger guy and tells his mates he's a vampire. So they all go out, and it's fantastic.
But there's the great twist at the end. It's that kind of, although it's if you were a child, you most probably you could watch it if you were a child. It's not gory or anything, but it's that kind of psychological kind of thing. But at the end, he walks into his mum's room, and his mum's like, she's a vampire. Is that in his head? Or was that real? Yeah.
That's a brilliant thing, because she's built up as basically an alcoholic, and she's negligent. And you kind of think, is that how he sees his mum now? Or is she an actual vampire? Like you said, it was incredible.
That's part of my question is, if you think about that era, there were a lot of programs like Play for Today and stuff like that had a lot of supernatural episodes. Dave, I'll start with Dave on this one. Do you have you got any particulars that you like? I mean, the Stone Tape, stuff like that. Loved it.
Yeah,
loved that stuff.
Stone Tape is an absolute classic. Yeah. I mean, I think quite a lot of the shows you see in that era, they do rely on the Stone Tape theory, don't they? Quite a lot of them do have ghosts as a product of the. I watched one actually last night. I watched the Exorcism from Dead of Night. I watched that last night.
Right.
Oh, fantastic!
Edward Petherbridge and Clive Swift's in that as well. Sylvia Kay, and the woman's name escapes me for the moment. But it's about where they go. They basically, Edward Petherbridge and his wife have bought this house dirt cheap, and then when they get inside, they end up locked inside, sealed inside. There's complete blackness outside.
That's right. Excellent episode. Yes,
it's absolute. Yes. And the end reveal is horrific.
Yep.
And that's from like 1972, and it absolutely stands up now. So I would say, that absolutely was one of my favorites. I've watched it before, but I watched it again last night just getting.
What you were saying before, Dave, about the theatricality. Because I watched The Exorcism not so long ago as well, and I was struck again. And I timed it this time. There's a 10 when I can't remember the actress's name, gives that enormous monologue when she's possessed. 10 minutes long. It's virtually one shot.
Yes,
nearly just slowly zooming in on her face for 10. You couldn't do that now. I mean, I don't know. There's all the streaming things. They're kind of getting away with murder structurally and storytelling wise, but I can't think of many TV shows these days that would allow a 10-minute monologue.
You'd never hold on one shot like that, which they would, because, like I said again, because they're trying to be more kinetic these days. They're just trying to move around. You'd be getting more reaction shots. You'd be getting maybe a cut to the curtains blowing or something. You'd have something to ramp the scene up a bit, but you don't need it. It's just that woman's face and that fantastic performance.
So, I have. You've not just got one book. You've got two books, and I think another one on the way. Or you've got 3 books or 2?
2 books with a third on the way later this year.
So, how does the second one differ from the first one? What have you added or taken away from the second book rather than the first?
The second book is, the first book is the 70s,
right?
Completely the 70s, and the second book is TV in the 80s, and the reason for that is because the 80s turned out to be such a massive undertaking that it had to be split into 2 books. In fact, thinking about it now, the 70s should probably be split into 2 books, because we keep finding more and more stuff that we wish we'd put in. People keep saying, have you seen this? We went, no, we haven't, but we wish we had, because we would have put that in as well.
Or the stuff that people on Twitter or Facebook will go, oh, you should have put this in volume 1, and we'll be like, we would have, but we kind of took it out because we just wanted to do one. I wish we'd done 2 books nowadays.
Yeah,
I really do.
I think there's plenty of material to do 2 books. Absolutely.
So volume 3 is going to be the equivalent to the second half of Volume 1. So it's going to be films, books, comics, toys and games, the paranormal, and it's going to have a book within a book in Volume 3, because we're looking at, set as it is during the 1980s when me and Dave were teenagers. It's going to deal with the nuclear anxiety of the time. So we're going to deal with, there's going to be a section within the book that just deals with nuclear war themed films, nuclear war themed TV shows, comics, books, video games, board games, you name it.
Protect and Survive, that was it. That was was the show they made us watch at school.
Wow.
If you hear the sirens, lie in the gutter, and if you're at home, get behind a door and you'll be fine.
That's the one.
Apparently you'll be all right from a nuclear blast. But it was very much like that in the 80s, wasn't it? It was very sort of on the cusp. Any moment we were gonna all be sort of, instantly vaporized. And I think back now, and I remember leaflets being handed through the door of how to survive an attack. And also I live in Weston-super-Mare, so a little seaside coastal town, and I remember the air raid sirens being tested. Once a week, the sirens would go off as a precaution, that if you heard the siren, I don't know where you went if the sirens went off. I don't know, because there wasn't any air raid shelters.
Well, I live quite close to Port Sunlight, where there's a Lever Brothers factory which makes like soap powder and stuff like that. And every morning at 8:45 a.m. they would sound an air raid siren to announce the start of the working day. So I faced nuclear annihilation
every morning,
every single morning of my teenage life.
What about you, Stephen? Did you? What's your thoughts on the sort of the Cold War era?
A huge part of my teenage years. I mean, we talk about this at the live shows. Our third member of our group, Bob Fisher, who writes for 40 Times, he's an ex-BBC presenter, a radio presenter. But he had the same experience as me. Between 1983 and 1984, start of 1985, I spent every single day of my life anxious, literally anxious, wondering if that was going to be. I mean, I could have a laugh with my mates. I could be going to see Ghostbusters. I could be playing football in the park. But at the back of my head
always
was the thought, is it going to happen today? I didn't think I was going to live to see 1990. That was out the question. The question was, when was it going to happen, not if.
Yeah. So
it was basically, I had my first panic attack, age 13, lying awake in bed one night, worrying about nuclear war. This is a thing. Dave made this point at one of our live shows. We've kept it in. I think that there's two 1980s. There's two nostalgias. There's the Stranger Things 1980s. That's D&D and Testarossa cars and neon grids and Miami Vice. And there's one that we remember in Britain, which is Boys from the Black Stuff and AIDS and nuclear war and mass unemployment.
Yeah.
And it was the pop culture was bright and brilliant and bouncy, and the music and the films, but life was horrible. It was a grim time to be alive, man.
But we had one good thing. We had, I believe, at the early 80s, was it Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World?
Oh, yes.
And we had the Unexplained magazine. So
yes, same year.
What are your thoughts on those? Because that's one of my favourite things. I think I've still got my volumes.
Well, go on, Dave. You tell it.
Okay, I was going to say, well, Steve recently got a complete run of the Unexplained. He bought them on eBay, and it was basically like a drugs deal going down. We had to go to a car park in Widnes and pick these volumes up, and we drove into the car park, and there was a guy standing by his car in an empty car park, and he looked at us, and we looked at him, and he nodded, and we nodded, and then we pulled up beside him, and then he opened the boot, and Steve likens it to that scene in Pulp Fiction where the suitcase opens. It's like this golden light.
Yeah.
He's 13 volumes of the Unexplained in his boot. He was a former newsagent, wasn't he? And he collected things, and he was getting rid of all his old collection. Yeah, I mean, I at the time I bought Unexplained as well. My worst fear wasn't issue 1 and the EVP. My worst fear was the spontaneous human combustion.
Yes.
In issue 2.
Oh, mine too.
Where I used to lie awake at night thinking that my legs were getting too warm, which is dumb, because you see the photos, your legs are the only thing that survives.
I'm laughing because I took that episode, I took that copy to school, and I was going around with my mates going, "Here, do you want to see an old lady's leg that's been burnt?" and I'd show them the picture.
This is the thing. My thing is, this is the thing. I've been fascinated, obsessed, let's say, with the paranormal since before I can remember. So anything to do with that, even now, I'm there in a shot. So these TV adverts appear for the Unexplained on ITV when I'm 10. And I still remember they're on YouTube now, but it's kind of that kind of circular laser light wall and an ominous voice saying, listing UFOs, ghosts, the Unexplained. And I'm like, right, I am there. Local newsagents over the road, my mum and dad's. And I can't remember. The Osborne Book of the Ghosts is a separate thing for me. That's the scariest book I had ever read in my life. The Unexplained was the scariest magazine I'd ever read. I got volume 1, issue 1, and I could barely look at some of those pictures, some of those pages. Went back for issue 2, again, spontaneous human combustion, no, and I tapped out at issue 3, even though I was aching to read this magazine because it was too scary. The UFO stories were unbearably creepy with those weird, crude color pencil drawings. I don't know if you remember those really weird aliens. Yeah. So the whole thing just exuded creepiness, eeriness, and it's got that thing that this is real.
Yes.
Right? It had a very forensic, almost academic tone to the writing to me as a child. And I couldn't deal with it. It was basically saying ghosts are real, UFOs are real, spontaneous human combustion is real. It went into the science behind some of it as well. So as a 10-year-old, it was too much for me. At the same time, I was watching Arthur C. Clarke every week as well. So I had a few sleepless nights, slept with the light on.
And you, Dave, did you have any sleepless nights watching Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World?
I found it immensely reassuring that at the end you go, yeah, that was all rubbish, that was. You just wasted 5 minutes of your life there. That was just nonsense.
I'm all right. I'm in Sri Lanka. It's lovely and warm.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in
See you next week.
I invented the communication satellites. I know what I'm talking about.
That used to do my head in every week, because I was utterly credulous. So I was absolutely rapt watching this show about stigmata or ghosts or poltergeists or whatever, and then he'd turn up at the end and go, "Nah, it's all bollocks." I was like, "Oh," shaking my fist at the screen. No, it isn't.
Some of it creeped me out anyway. I mean, that thing, that thing they get from the sea. I think it's like, isn't it like a shark's carcass or something like that? They say it is, but there's that's a horrible image, no matter what it was.
Yeah, partly eaten and stuff. Yeah,
that got me. That got me a bit. Yeah, and as I say, obviously, spontaneous human combustion, things like that. Many a sleepless night, and I don't think Arthur C. Clarke helped me in any way whatsoever.
So I know both of you have a keen interest in the paranormal, and yes, obviously we're talking about everything to do with the occult. What are your thoughts on the paranormal? Do you actively research it in any way? Have you ever been to a haunted house, or have you ever had any experiences with the paranormal?
As for my attitude to it, I am willing to be convinced. I wouldn't say I was a believer in things like that. I wouldn't say I didn't believe. I would just say I'm prepared to listen to what people say.
That's good.
And judge it on its own merit. I do have two. There's two.
That's fine.
There's two things. When I still live in the house that I was brought up in, which I inherited once my parents died. And when I was very little, about maybe 6 years old, my nan, who was an Irish lady, who was the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter and claimed to have psychic powers to see beyond the veil, she said to me as a little boy, she said, in your house, there's always somebody standing at the top of your stairs. That is not something you want to say to a 6-year-old.
Not really.
Child. So, yeah, that was worse. That was worse than the spontaneous human combustion. That was me not sleeping for about a year after that. And the second one is, again, this happened to me and I can't explain it. A few years back, I was clearing out the loft in this house that was built in the 1930s. And I had it's that long ago, I had a portable CD player that I was going to take up into the loft and play tunes while I was working. And I had two CDs. I had a swing music CD from the 30s and I had a Now That's What I Call Music. In the loft, the Now That's What I Call Music CD would not play. Just refused to play. When I brought it back down again, it played fine on the landing, but when I went back on the loft, it wouldn't play. The only music that would play in the loft was music from the 1930s.
That's a bit
which
weird.
is kind of freaky.
Yeah, that is a bit weird.
Can't explain that.
And
Can't explain that.
You never got to the bottom of it, Dave. You never.
Never. I don't understand why that happened. The pop music CD played absolutely fine when you came down because I had a ladder. Came down a ladder, CD played fine. Went back up, wouldn't play.
Have you experienced anything further in the house regarding sort of weirdness?
You sometimes, I don't know. It's an old house, so it settles at night. You hear creaks and that. Sometimes, you feel you hear creaks that sound like someone walking up and down the stairs, but not especially. No, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to believe about that. I mean, I've just thought of the third thing. I once found all my shoes piled into a pyramid.
That's weird.
Right, and you still live there.
Yeah, I didn't do it. But all my shoes were piled up, like 5 shoes, then 4 shoes, then 3 shoes, like that.
Blimey, that's a bit.
Don't know why. I didn't do it. I certainly didn't do it.
I have a panic attack when I can't find my keys. I think something's they've aborted somewhere. They've gone.
There's a ghost here. They're very kindly arranging my shoes for me, so I can't complain about that.
And you, Stephen, what's your experience with the paranormal?
Well, like I say, I've been fascinated since literally before I can remember. And when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and especially when I was in my 20s, the decade of the X-Files, I was completely credulous. I just believed everything I wanted to believe.
Yeah.
Now, I'd describe it. I'm definitely a believer because I've experienced stuff that I can't explain. No one can explain. My outlook on it is, I just think there's a lot more out there than we understand. I think it can be, I don't know if I'd call it supernatural. This is the thing. I don't think I believe in the supernatural. I just believe in things that we haven't explained through science yet.
Yeah.
And there's just too much out there to just shut down and say these people are all lying, these people are all deranged, these things are all atmospheric disturbances, because they explain the vast majority of these things, but they don't explain them all. And I mean, when you've reached the point where the American government finally came out and said, yeah, there are UFOs, they exist, we don't know what they are, they're intelligently controlled, they're up there, they're on radar, and our pilots are seeing them every other day. Where do you go from there? That's basically...
Well, I was going to ask that question regarding UFOs because with the recent hearings in America, I of course I watched it, and the one thing I took away from it was there were a lot of official people there going, yeah, here's a video, this is a picture, but we don't know anything, so that's the end of that. There's some pictures, but that's about it. There's not enough information. We don't have enough data, and I think that when you hear governments officials say that, when you go back all of the years with all the UFO phenomenon that's happened, all the pictures now, okay, I will say that there's a lot of it that's maybe misidentified and people see things and they're confused by what they see, or they sort of don't remember it. But there are an awful lot of cases out there that people see stuff and it is completely unexplained. And when I'm not getting all weird, but when somebody in a suit who works for the government says there's nothing to worry about here, I get a little bit worried. You know what I mean?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, the American government, especially, has got form for not telling people. I mean, I'll always remember this. I remember seeing an interview with an American general in, I think it was the 80s, early 90s. Could be wrong. It was a long time ago. And he basically talked about the unveiling of the stealth bomber.
Yeah.
And he said the reason we unveiled it to the public was because it was obsolete as far as we were concerned. We were already flying the next one.
Old
so
tech,
it was safe to put it out. Yeah, old tech. So, I mean, I'll tell you about my experience in a bit.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. Where I am now is I would call myself a skeptical believer.
That's
I do think there's a lot out there, but I no longer just read something and go, oh, I kind of read something and go, really? I need a bit more than your hearsay. I've just finished rereading an incredible book by a journalist called Will Storr, who is quite a young guy, but I think he's in his 30s, 40s now, but he kind of writes books. He wrote a book about social media in the 21st century, how it's turned us all into narcissists in some form or another. He's quite a deep writer. He's a brilliant
Will Storr,
writer.
he wrote Will Storr versus Paranormal.
That's what I've just finished rereading for the second time because it's so entertaining. And the things I find compelling now, like I kind of used to love reading UFO books and ghost books by people who were immersed in the folklore, immersed in the community. I just find them exhausting now because they're coming in with an agenda, because they believe from the outset.
Yeah.
I'm more compelled by writers who don't have a horse in the game. Like Will Storr comes into this book saying, I've got absolutely no interest at all in the paranormal, which is why I'm writing this book.
Yeah.
And he goes from being disinterested to being skeptical to a believer to being skeptical again. And at the end, he basically, his summation was, how can you not believe in this? He doesn't know what it is. And his thing is my thing, as in, I think the answer to all these questions is, I don't know. I don't know what these things are. I can't say they're aliens. I can't say they're from another planet. No one knows this. The three big questions that face us as a species are, is there a God? What happens when we die? And are we alone in the universe? And we don't know the answers to any of those questions.
No.
And that's exciting to me. So I approach this thing because I find it entertaining, and I find testimony or investigations from people who aren't immersed in, like, if there's a haunting, I'm not as interested in hearing what the people at the heart of the haunting have to say. I'm more interested in the neighbors and their friends.
Yeah.
Because they haven't got a horse in that game.
Yeah.
So that's where my skeptical believer thing comes in. Having said that, I'll tell you about the time I saw a massive black triangle in Liverpool city centre in broad daylight. It was 1996, and the Euro 96 football tournament was on. And I used to go out clubbing to the Crazy House. It was an alternative club in Liverpool every Thursday with my mates.
Yeah.
At that point, I was 26, and it was midsummer week. So it was kind of broad daylight by 4:30 in the morning. Now, at the time, all the clubs used to shut at 2 in the morning, but they had special dispensation around the country to open till 4. So everyone could go and watch these matches that were on at like midnight or 1 o'clock. So I was out clubbing with my mates till 4. We spilled out of this club. There's a street in Liverpool city centre called Slater Street, just round the corner from Bold Street, which is where I used to work, Forbidden Planet. And there was a burger place, there was a fast food place on a corner that we stopped off for food on the way home. Now, 2 of my friends were inside this place getting their order.
Yeah.
And I was chatting to 2 more of my mates outside, and they were kind of looking, facing the window and kind of rapping on it and distracting my mates, and I was kind of chatting away. To this day, I don't know. I mean, I'd been drinking water all night. I wasn't drunk. Completely sober,
right?
Didn't take drugs, completely straight. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned round and looked up in time to see a massive black triangle float over Slater Street, completely silently, and so smooth, straight over the street and over the buildings. With it was like jet black, no reflections. There was a big red light, circular red light in the middle, and there was little blue lights on each tip. And the street was kind of deserted. It's not now like when the clubs come out and city centres are teeming.
Yeah.
Most people just went home. So there was the odd pisshead stumbling around on Slater Street. And I swear to God, Reeves, I could have turned round to my mates. They were less than a foot away and grabbed them by the arm. I was so shocked. I was rooted to the spot.
Yeah.
Just watching it go over. I didn't talk to them. I sprinted down to the end of the road and turned right and sprinted as fast as I could up Bold Street, looking over the rooftops to see where it had gone, right to the top of this road where it opens out completely. And it wasn't there. So I start walking back to my friends thinking, did that just happen?
Yeah.
Did I really just see that? So I'm kind of shell-shocked. My mates obviously see me and go, well, where the f did you go? You just sprinted away for no reason. I lied. I said, I saw a friend from school I hadn't seen in years. Got talking to them because I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen. So I walked home that night. It was broad daylight. It was like 4:30 in the morning. Got home about 5:15 in the morning. And all the time, all I could think about was that. Did that just happen? And I've never stopped thinking about it. to this day. You can't help but have your outlook changed when you see something.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's not. I mean, I had to rationalize it. Eventually, told me mates a week later, and rationalized it as in what we were just talking about, as a top secret military plane. This is the next one after the stealth bomber. But there's a postscript to this story about, oh God, I'm trying to think. Time's so weird now. I think it must have been 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago. There was a guy we knew. He was an American guy. He was one of our customers who used to come in with his son. But he was a doorman on the pubs around Liverpool. He used to work security in Tesco's and stuff. But he came running into the shop, Forbidden Planet, one afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, and kind of was like, Steve, I told him about the UFO. And he said, I've just been chatting to one of the other doormen who works on one of the pubs on Slater Street. We got chatting about UFOs. And he goes, yeah, Larry, you'll never believe this one. 1996, middle of summer, Euro 96 was on. I'm having a smoke outside this place. Look up and I see this massive black triangle go over, and it was the same thing, same night. Yeah. So there was that almost that validation. God knows, this is the answer. I don't know what it was.
I had a friend that was walking home one night, like yourself. He'd been out. He was been out with walked his girlfriend home. He was walking home, walking down a small, the laneways between the houses, and he walks down this laneway, and it's an L shape, right? And he walks down this laneway, and as he gets halfway down this laneway, there's this ball of light hovering at the bottom of the lane, the size of a football, glowing, and he just stops dead. He thought it was a carrier bag to start with, blowing in the wind, but there was no wind. And this is the dead of night. It was sort of 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. It was very early, and it was just hovering there, and then it hovered away past the hedge and out of sight down the other side of the lane. And he carefully walked down to the end of the lane and looked around the corner, and it wasn't there anymore. And he said it was the most weirdest thing that he'd ever... I think he witnessed something like ball lightning. That's what I think he witnessed. And all these things that people witness, I mean, if you go back to... You mentioned it earlier. I think it was you or Dave mentioned it. The advent of shows like The X-Files in the 90s and that, or all those kind of TV shows, you had your Strange But True. Do you think in any way that kind of pushed forward the paranormal kind of consciousness of... the mainly pop culture, because everything was Mulder and Scully, wasn't it? Everybody wanted to be either Mulder or Scully back then, and it was like, I want to believe sort of thing. Do you think that had a lot to do with it, those kind of shows?
Oh, huge. The X-Files was a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't it wasn't like Game of Thrones, which is just huge and everyone watches it and then it ends and then off we pop. It had a huge, huge impact on popular culture. Because if I think back to the 90s, I think back to Britpop and Labour government and blah, 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 and everyone was out and getting drunk and ecstasy. But the other thing I think about was that was the paranormal decade.
Yeah.
That was,
crop
you
circles.
Couldn't move for documentaries. You couldn't move for local news reports. You couldn't move for magazines. The paranormal was everywhere. And even down to things like Take Me to Your Dealer and Schwa. I don't know if you remember Schwa, it was like a fashion label type thing that had that grey alien, the grey alien head.
Vaguely. Whitley Strieber, Whitley Strieber first coined that with the grey, I
mean, Space Raiders, Outer Spaces, whatever they're calling the crisps. Is it Space Raiders or Outer Spaces? Yeah, they changed their packaging from kind of 2000 AD style comic strip artwork to a grey alien in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was everywhere because of the X-Files.
That's correct. So I was going to say to you, Dave, a second add-on, because I know that I can see from behind you're quite a big sci-fi fan.
Yes.
Just a little bit.
That's a great collection.
It's all right, isn't it?
I wanted to add on to you with Star Trek and shows like that. How do you think that they kind of... do you think they took from, the pop culture, the sci-fi, because everything kind of evolved really quickly, and we got into this,
I think that people observe things and then they filter it through their own experiences of what they know. So I think inevitably, once you've got things like Star Trek or X-Files, they're going to couch what they've seen in terms of that. They're going to say, oh, it was a grey alien, or it was, somebody beamed down. Yeah, I was just thinking about a couple of other examples.
That's fine, yeah.
Have told me things that they've seen.
Yeah.
Again, both of these are, again, inexplicable. Sorry, not unexplained, not inexplicable.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, many years ago, was walking back from the pub and he saw a flaming cross in the sky.
What?
Again, a flaming cross in the sky. Not a man given to fancy or anything like that. And again, he didn't watch these shows. He didn't watch that. So he wasn't filtering it through any sort of, oh, look at that. That must be from the X-Files. And the second one is my cousin, again, a woman who's not given to fancy, very down to earth. She lived in a very old house in the town where I live. I pointed out to you the other week, didn't I? Stay there. This little house.
Yeah.
It's the 18th century. Tiny house. You can tell it's really old because it's tiny. It's not like a modern, bigger house. It's like, low ceilings, that kind of thing. And she claims, again, no reason to tell lies, no reason to embellish, that she once walked into her own living room and there was a little old lady sitting in a rocking chair, rocking slowly backwards and forwards. And my cousin didn't even own a rocking chair, never mind a little old lady. So this house is old. So, I mean, maybe that is stone tape again. But the point I'm making is I think they weren't in any way inspired by the TV shows they were watching. They weren't influenced into thinking it was going to be something from the X-Files or something from Star Trek or something from Doctor Who or whatever. Although I do think that people do try and process things in a way that they've seen. So in when you used to get all those the flying saucer films in the 50s, people saw flying saucers, and then later on, when people's visions of what alien spaceships look like, the images that they saw changed.
Yeah,
so I think,
true.
Yeah, people are processing things in ways that they can comprehend.
Absolutely.
And that's what you do when you face the incomprehensible. You try and comprehend it the way you've seen. So
well, I've been reading about UFOs. That's my main interest. I'm fascinated by UFOs, the whole mythology.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more I realise that a huge proportion of it is folklore.
Yes.
As in,
it does, yeah.
Stories that change over time and they don't stand still. And it's exactly what Dave said. It's because their experiences, if they're having them, are filtered through the times that they're living in. So you, as Dave says, you get those kind of classic flying saucers from the 1940s and 50s, the Space Brothers, the Venusians, with long hair, and they're beautiful. And then you've got that period in the 60s and 70s that the Unexplained deals with, where every UFO alien report, it's almost like no two are the same.
They're all different.
Just like a menagerie of aliens.
Yeah.
Then you get to 1986, 87, Whitley Strieber's Communion comes out, and that image, that face, is locked in forever.
Yeah.
The grey alien comes from the front of that book. Everything in pop culture, South Park, the X-Files, you name it, comes from Communion. And now we're at a point where every time someone sees a UFO or has an abduction experience, whatever they claim to have, it's always the grey alien. 99% of the time, because they filtered that image through several layers of pop culture history. And you very rarely seem to get the kind of, it had bat wings and black skin, it had a great big bulbous head,
yes,
it was on all fours. It just doesn't seem to happen anymore because of Communion. So that's another thing that my skepticism kicks in. Is it, as Dave says, is it our brains trying to comprehend what we're seeing, or is it folklore happening before our eyes?
I think we're onto something there. I think that as a whole, we're onto something. If you go back to medieval times, there's a you're talking about folklore. There's a story from medieval, I think it's Ireland, where villagers witnessed a ship in the sky, an actual sail ship, and the individuals on board threw an anchor down and swam down to them and greeted them and swam back up to the ship. And you think, well, that's a bit weird, but in those days, they always they kind of looked at the sky as a different a different place, a place that had its own atmosphere, its own place. So it's only natural that they would think, well, maybe, you can sail a ship up there. And as you're saying, maybe in culture we have this kind of mindset where we project the way that we understand something. For example, the old days when the explorers would go out and they would go out on their sailing ships and they'd go all around the world and they would meet tribes from thousands of miles away and far away places, and they would go and they would trade with them, and they'd go into the tribe and say, the tribe would say, well, how did you get here? Travel here. How did you get? And they would show them the ships, and the tribes could not see the ships only until they put them in boats and rowed them out to the ships, so they could become aware of them, because they didn't know what a ship was. They'd never seen a ship before, so their brains weren't able to process what it was they were meant to be seeing. So
you've got.
Sorry, Dave. Yeah, no.
I was just about to say, you've got things like the cargo cult, haven't you?
Yeah.
Where they processed the American Air Force being there during the war as being gods, and now they build these fake airfields to try and bring the gods back. It's how you process things through your own mythology, I guess.
As a society, we're more used to seeing strange shaped things in the air and on television. So that's filtering through again. The latest thing is the Tic Tac.
Yeah.
That's the number one. Everyone talks about the Tic Tac shaped UFO. I noticed Tic Tac's latest advertising campaign is take a ride on a Tic Tac, because they finally took advantage of the fact that everyone is talking about the Tic Tac UFO, which is brilliant.
I do think that our technology is evolving faster than our brains are. And I think, I mean, on Twitter the other day, chemtrails were trending again, and they're just.
Oh, Dave,
yes,
I lost brain cells.
Yeah, no, I know. But what I'm saying is that people are looking at like technology and the advance of technology, and they're processing it through like maybe a more primitive view, in terms of just what their experience is. So I think that's an issue as well. I think you're seeing things that maybe are super advanced, or you're seeing things you don't entirely understand yourself. And I think it's easier then to buy into like, oh, it's this, or it's there's a conspiracy involving this. And I just think that's an issue with it as well. I think that's an issue with the reporting of paranormal events as well.
Since I was a kid, the first UFO book I ever bought was J. Allen Hynek's The UFO Experience when I was about 8. My favorite film of all time is Close Encounters.
Oh, great!
Changed
film.
My life.
Yeah.
And off the back of that, I bought The UFO Experience. It was too dry for me, but a lot of it absolutely terrified me. Some of the accounts in there.
Yeah.
And it's what Dave was saying. It's that filter. It's that kind of, this thing is too much for me to comprehend. I don't understand atmospheric science, so I'm going to say it's the government creating chemtrails. And it's exactly what you're saying, Dave. It's a natural phenomenon. But the same thing filters through into everything like conspiracy theory, ufology. My interest now is kind of like, there's things happening. We don't know what it is. The government have owned up to it. There's amazing, I think he's an Australian reporter called Ross Coulthart. I'm reading his book at the moment. And he's another one. He's a heavyweight, really respected Australian journalist. But he decided to investigate UFOs. He didn't have a horse in the game, but he's a skeptical believer. His line again and again is, there's something happening. The weight of evidence is incontrovertible, but I won't believe that they're alien spacecraft until I've kicked its tires myself. Everything else is speculation.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I'm more like kind of, there is something happening in the sky. Nobody knows what it is. It's all speculation. And I start to become exhausted by the things that I used to love when I was in my 20s, when people start linking things to kind of the American government working with grey aliens in a base in Dulce. I just kind of go, oh, right, okay, really? Right, I used to love all that. But now I can only enjoy that as a kind of an X-Files.
Yeah, the Dulce Wars.
Science fiction thing. Yeah, I can't buy into that.
I remember,
mainly because there is no evidence.
Apparently, there's a hatch out in the desert, but it's shaped like a rock, so you got to know which rock to find, and then you can get into the.
I was reading about that last night in that book.
But the thing was, I was going to ask either of you, was regards aliens, regards other worlds, and whoever's might be visiting us. What do you think their agenda is? Why are they coming here? Why are we so special? What do you think? What have we got to offer apart from our amazing TV shows from the 70s?
Okay, do I believe there's life on other planets? Yes, obviously. I think the universe is so big, it would be insane to think we were the only people, the only creatures, the only living sentient beings in the universe. As to whether they're visiting here, I am not sure. And to answer your question, why are we special? I think that's the thing. I don't think we are particularly special. I think the history of humanity is gradually realizing we're not as special as we thought we were. Oh, we're the center of the universe. Oh, no, we're not. Oh, we're the center of the solar system. Oh, actually, no, we're not. I mean, I don't want to get too heavy into religion, but people who believe themselves created in the image of God have some issues with thinking they're a bit special. I think if aliens are coming in, I'm not dismissing the possibility. If aliens are coming in, I think it's because we're life and we're fascinated with other life. And we're fascinated with our people out there. Are there other people? Are there other beings out there? So if they're coming here, it's because we're alive and we're sentient and and we're interested and we're curious. And I'd say that's why. And as for belief, I think I'm always going to be a skeptic because I believe the only dangerous people in the world are people who are sure. Yeah. It's people who are actually certain in their beliefs. They're the dangerous people. They're the ones who burn the books. And skepticism is the way to approach any of this. I think you've got to think, okay, that could happen. But I don't want to ruin the magic of it. But I want to know more about that so I can make a more informed judgment. But yeah, I think if aliens are coming here, it's because we're sentient and because we are. That's not our special gift, but that's why they'd be coming here, I think.
Stephen?
I'm the same with Dave. I'm, like I say, a skeptical believer. I've been reading about this subject my entire life. This is the thing. People say, well, where's the evidence? There's the Fermi paradox. Again, I was reading about that again last night. Do you know about that, Dave?
I'm not sure. Just tell me what it is. I'll tell you now.
It's the, I can't remember his full name. I think it was a psychologist or something. I'm terrible with details, but in the 70s, he came up with a paradox, a question that has never been answered. Apparently it proves that the aliens aren't visiting. His question was, if aliens are out there, and he's not doubting that they are, where are they? Why haven't we met them? And I think it's the worst question ever. I think it's the most arrogant. You can blow it out the water in 3 seconds. It's going. Yeah. It just instantly presumes that they're not. And I agree with Dave. The most dangerous person in the world is someone who's sure, and it works the other way. Someone who's a complete skeptic is just as dangerous as someone who's a complete believer. And Will Storr talks about that at length in his book. Yeah. When he's going on his kind of journey about learning, going, Jesus Christ, he's a religious person as well. He grew up a Catholic in a Catholic house, massively lapsed. So he's questioning everything. And he realizes at one point that complete skeptics, debunkers, they're just as in the dark as anyone. But they're scared. Because if one of these cases turns out to be true, that's your reality gone. That's your world crumbled. So the out-and-out skeptic is just as bad as the out-and-out Fox Mulder, the credulous one. So I'm kind of in the middle. I'm completely open to this. There's too much. Like there's there's another book called Aliens and Why They're Here, by a Times Telegraph New Yorker journalist who has no stake in this, no interest. He just thought, well, because I've got no interest, I'm going to research UFOs and just see what happens. Yeah. And his book is split into two. One, he asks questions and he goes into all the big cases, no matter how ridiculous. He basically goes, I'm going to treat this on the same level as a journalist. And the second half of the book is coming up with hypotheses. Every hypothesis from Carl Jung, we're imagining it. It's the collective unconscious to nuts and bolts. It's just something as mundane as there are people in the universe who are older than us and they live over there and they've got better cars, better planes than us. Yeah. That's mundane. That's really boring when you put it like that. And it's really weird because he doesn't give his own views away at all. It's why I find it so compelling. He just attacks it straight down the middle until the second to last page. He says, I started as it's just an interesting subject to write about, became completely skeptical halfway through my research. And again, came to the end and just went, how can you not believe this? And it's purely because of the mountains of evidence that he's seen. He interviews I think it's in that book, he interviews a police detective at one point because he's interested in the whole idea of circumstantial evidence, which is true. It's all circumstantial. Every video, every picture, it's all circumstantial until one of them does land on the White House lawn. There's no reason why they should, because why is the White House so bleeding important? They wouldn't know what the White House is, but it's the cliche. So until that moment comes, it's all circumstantial. And this detective goes, oh no, people are routinely convicted of murder on mountains of circumstantial evidence, because the mountain becomes so big, it becomes almost hard evidence. And this journalist like, oh, wow. So he said, if you're talking about this detective's like, if you're talking about UFOs, then if there's a mountain of circumstantial evidence, you've got to listen to some of it. And that's where I am. That's my belief. As to why they're here, completely agree with Dave. It's, you spin the question around and say, well, if we were out in our flying ships in the galaxy, and if we came across intelligent life, do you honestly think we're going to go, oh, there's an intelligent civilization there? Anyway, let's turn around and go home.
Yeah.
You're going to go, let's study them in the same way that you see a tribe in the middle of nowhere in the jungle. You keep your distance. If we're going from that assumption, as Dave said, if we're assuming they exist, it's because we're life. We're not special, but we are life. There's even the theory that they're going, oh God, the intelligent monkeys can kill themselves with these big bombs now. So now we're going to keep extra special tabs on them, which is the theory that comes up again and again as to why UFO sightings erupted from 1946.
From the atom bomb,
onwards. But yeah, I think it's as mundane as that. We're life, and they found us, and they want to have a look.
Well, guys, that was absolutely fascinating, and unfortunately, I think we've come to the end of the episode. But
we could go on all night. This is what we always me and Dave.
I think we're gonna. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 at some point, because there's just not enough time in the day.
Oh yeah.
I want to know on my.
I didn't say about my haunted shop, Reeves, but we'll do
no. Actually, we're gonna.
Stories.
I want to hear the haunted shop. I need the ghost stories.
Oh, I used to work in Forbidden Planet in Bold Street in Liverpool, almost from the off. I worked from 1997 to 2020, and the safe is in this horrible. It looks like something from Blair Witch. The basement. The safe would be in the basement, and it would be someone's job who would pull the short straw at the end of every working day to take the cash, take the money down to the safe and lock it in there. And you couldn't help it, It's one of those things, you go down the creaky wooden stairs, you immediately feel like there's someone behind you.
Oh, yeah.
So you just kind of sprint downstairs, do the safe stuff quickly as possible with the flickering dim lights, and you're running up the stairs again because you feel like someone's behind you. And everyone said the same thing. Everyone who worked there. And there was some real skeptics. One of my closest friends, Chrissy's the ex-manager of that Forbidden Planet.
Yep.
It's the most, you'll back me up, Dave, is he not the most skeptical man?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's no nonsense.
Yeah. Salt of the earth, straight down the middle. It's all a load of crap. And yet he's told me stories of the stuff that he's experienced in there. But he still doesn't believe the ghosts, as in the spirits of the dead. My own experience, this is the one that it could be anything, but it freaked me out. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 2001. I was upstairs on my own in the staff area, which adjoins the kitchen and it adjoins the stockroom, just reading a comic and having a cuppa and eating my dinner, completely silent. And suddenly I hear footsteps coming from the stockroom into the room that I'm in.
Right.
And it goes into the kitchen. And it's not a case of, I wonder what that noise was. All I remember is every hair on my body standing on end. And suddenly I was sprinting down the stairs halfway through my dinner. Didn't go back up there. And everyone was like, what's wrong with you? You've got half an hour left on your dinner. And I was like, no, I feel a bit ill or whatever. I made whatever excuse. Didn't tell anyone for ages because I heard someone walk through 3 rooms. But having said that, the older I get, the more I think, there's about 100 explanations for that, if I'm being honest. Because the shop adjoined a cafe on one side, there's another shop on the other, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But assistant manager Dave used to go clubbing in town. He lives in Runcorn, so he'd go gigging and clubbing on a Friday, Saturday sometimes, but he'd miss the last bus home. So he'd stay over at the shop. And he used to tell us about just stuff that he would hear beyond the shop settling that would freak him out in his little sleeping bag in the staff room. But the one that got me because all of these things can be put down to kind of your brain working overtime. Of course, it's 2:00 in the afternoon, 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
In a creaky old shop, of course you're going to start hearing things. But the one that gets me is Chris, our skeptical manager, in the middle of a big refit in 2010. The chief kind of buildings and maintenance guy from head office in London comes up for the weekend to sort out some of the refit. And we're working away. Everyone else goes home. And Chris and Lawrence, the guy from head office, who are both skeptics, both salt of the earth, no interest in the paranormal at all, stay behind till about 10:00, working on bits of the shop. Now, the shop is shut at like 5:30, 6:00. And bearing in mind, there's only been those two on the shop floor working away for 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours. So Chris goes to the toilet upstairs, and Lawrence, the guy from head office, is up a ladder working on some of the lights. And he sees movement out the corner of his eye and looks around and sees a guy walking around the shop with kind of a bowler hat on, a big waxed moustache, dressed like he's from the 1920s.
Weird.
And carrying a wooden camera tripod over his shoulder.
Yeah.
Now, Lawrence, being salt of the earth, doesn't think, shit, it's a ghost. He shouts at this guy, "Oi, we shut 4 hours ago.
Blimey.
How did you get in here?" He doesn't care. He's basically swearing at this guy. He's like, "We're shut." And this guy ignores him. So Lawrence comes down off his ladder. And we've got kind of, at that point, we had quite high shelving. It was above head height. So he's going around the shelving, around the shop. No one there. Now, you need to open this heavy, you'll know yourself, Dave, this heavy wooden door and lift a noisy shutter to get out of the shop. None of those things happened. This guy, dressed like he was from the 20s with a wooden tripod, had gone. So that's the point where Lawrence shits himself. Yeah. And Chris comes back down from going to the toilet and says to Lawrence, like, "What's up? You seem a bit in a state." Lawrence tells him what happened. And even it got to Chris a little bit because Lawrence is so rational. He kind of, the pair of them were like, "Oh, okay, right." Now, Chris went home and did a bit of digging because that was it. Dave, the assistant manager, one day he was on his own in the stockroom trying to find a toy for a customer that wasn't on the shop floor, seeing if we had it in stock.
Right.
Sees movement out the corner of his eye, looks over and sees an old woman in a white dress go past the door. And again, he doesn't think, "Oh my God, it's a ghost." He just thinks it's an old woman, a pensioner.
Yeah.
Who's got confused and thinks the shop's on 2 floors, bless her. So he basically says, "Oh, I'm really sorry, love, but this isn't part of the shop. This is our staff area, stockroom. Gonna have to go back downstairs." No reply. So Dave goes out the stockroom, looks in the staff area, looks in the kitchen. There's nobody there. There's no footsteps, nothing. And he clearly saw an old woman in a white dress go past. Now, we collate all these stories over the years. And Chris does our manager does a bit of digging into the history of 92 Bold Street on the internet. It turns out that before it was Forbidden Planet, it was a bridal wear shop. Lots of white dresses there. And way back in the 20s, it was a photographic studio.
Yeah.
And it was a photographic studio with a HMV dog listening to the gramophone.
Right.
That photograph was taken upstairs on that site. So even Chris is like, shit, a guy dressed like he's from the 20s with a camera tripod. The story gets weirder because there's just weird stuff going on and a weird vibe in that shop, like downstairs in the basement. And we all feel it, even though we're joking about it. And Chris and Colin are really skeptical, and it could be anything. But this is the weird bit. One of Chris's mates, Andy, Andy's wife says she's a Wiccan, a witch.
Uh-huh.
And she's like, "I'll come in the shop after hours and I'll do some blah, 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 and I'll get rid of the ghosts." So even we're all like, "Yeah, okay, cool." Like, I don't believe it. No one believes it. That's a step far too far for any of us. But Chris is like, oh, God, whatever. It's going to be a laugh. So she comes in the shop and does whatever it is she does. I've gone home by this point. I'm not interested. And the next day, we're all like that. "Okay, Chris, well, what happened? What happened?" And Chris is like, "Right, she reckons there's 3 ghosts in the shop. There's an old guy from World War II. There's a young teenager called Billy, who's a bit mischievous, and a little girl. And we're like, okay, because this is a bit much for all of us. But Chris is like, but she did whatever she did. I couldn't understand any of it. And she reckons they're all gone now. They've gone to peace. And I swear to God, and my rational side of my brain, the 99% of me that's thinking this rationally, is because I've been told that. That's why we didn't feel anything afterwards. But not one of us felt anything after that day. Nothing.
Weird.
And like I say,
Bizarre.
it's probably, to me, it's because we were told they're gone. So we were like, do you know what? But we talked about it. It was a while later. We went, have you felt anything? Do you still feel someone behind you? And no, I don't feel it anymore. And I'm like, oh. Well, I don't know. Like I say, I don't know.
That's a weird one. That's a weird story. That's a bit spooky.
But it's a fact that if you met him, you'd understand. I can't explain enough how skeptical Chris is.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Lawrence, I've met Lawrence loads of times. He's like an Arthur Daly character. He's not asked about ghosts.
Yeah.
He just wants a pint.
Sometimes.
And it rattled him. I spoke to him about it. He was like, I don't want to talk about it.
I think that's the thing, though, isn't it, Steve? I mean, the people you believe most, the people who've got, like you say, no horse in the game, whatever, in the race. My dad wasn't given to fancy. My cousin wasn't. And anybody who's told me anything like that has never, not sort of person who would exaggerate or embellish anything they'd seen. They were just down to earth people, and that makes the story all the more believable. And stuff all more inexplicable.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely there's definitely another episode of Paratalk here. I think that we have to delve deeper into the ghost phenomenon and start to do something like that, because
there's loads of TV shows and comics and basically all pop culture that was kind of occult and supernaturally. This is the thing, Dave. We've had an idea for a future Scarred for Life book. God knows when this is going to happen, but the Scarred for Life book of the paranormal. But we're not going to look at the paranormal. We want to look at the way the paranormal was portrayed on television, in comics, documentaries. It's one thing we found, haven't we, Dave, that you look at BBC documentaries from the 70s and 80s, and they're just full of gravitas and they're very sedate.
Yeah, quality.
And nowadays, it's kind of people on green screen.
Yeah.
In old houses, screaming at each other because they've just seen some dust or an insect on the camera, and it's like, oh.
Or if they do a paranormal story in the news, it'll be at the end where you usually get the one about the duck skateboarding and things like that. But back in the day, it would be like further up the news, the news items in a more serious position. It's not. It didn't used to be. And finally,
Maybe we could come back and talk about that.
Definitely.
I mean, the subject, just the way these things were portrayed was.
We're gonna have to get you back on and talk about the classic 70s documentaries at 40 minutes and stuff, where they would go to Borley Church and do a whole documentary about ghosts and stuff. And all that stuff. We're definitely gonna have to do that.
There's a great one about spontaneous human combustion from the 80s.
Oh, don't say that, Steve.
Have you seen it, Dave?
Okay, again.
Definitely.
There's a QED. They try and go into the science of it. They try and explain it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's the slow burning pig. Yeah, I've seen
That's
that
the one.
Yeah.
There's lots of oozing fat. It's horrible.
Well, it's quite horrible. But some of it is it's scientific, but some of it does answer a few questions. But I definitely another episode is on the cards for paranormal television shows and that. We can't get enough of this. Some of the listeners are going to love this because they're a little bit like me. I'm Mr. Stuck in the 80s and 70s. I'm always going on about it, but it's nice to sort of talk to people who have actually done something and put a book together and kind of catalogued it. I was going to ask you, but you kind of answered my question. My final question was, what is your new project? Have you got something you can talk about that's on the cards? But you've kind of answered it, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well, we've got lots good.
So Volume 3 is a work in progress. We've got other ideas. I mean, it's no secret that we're talking about doing like a sort of horror anthology kind of thing, so a Scarred for Life horror anthology. And there's other stuff again we can't really talk about yet because there's. But we've got a lot on our plates, haven't we, Steve?
Yeah. Well, we've got the live shows. It's
the live shows. Yeah.
We've got South Shield, the Customs House. Let me show you if I've got this right. The Customs House Theatre in South Shields on the 23rd. 23rd
of June, Thursday, the 23rd of June.
So we've got that to come. But like Dave said, we've got the Scarred for Life book of horror stories in the vein of the Pan book of horror stories.
Yeah, cool.
We've got a Scarred for Life annual, hopefully next year, which is going to be like the old hardback annuals that you used to get as a kid.
Yep.
But like I say, we've got plenty of ideas for future books.
Well, if you do an annual, okay, just make sure that you've got the price in the bottom right-hand corner so that we can cut it out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this book belongs to. That's
this book belongs to.
Don't you worry.
You remember when your granny and mum would always cut the price out, and you think, why'd you do that? I don't care how much. You've ruined it now. It's not real. It's not coal. But yeah,
I never understood that till I was in my 20s. I was like, they didn't want me to know that it was.
Don't want to know how much you paid for it. It was 75 pence.
You're younger than me. When it was my annuals, it was like 2 shillings and 6pence.
Wow.
I'm pre-decimal still. You know?
Well, actually, I bought I went into I love going around charity shops looking for stuff, and I bought a Battlestar Galactica annual from 1970 whatever when it came out. It was from the original, not the remake, the original Battlestar.
78, 79.
Yeah, 78 I think, and it was the annual from that of the story. And I thought I had it. I was moving, and I thought I wish I kept it. And I thought, I'm just going to put this on eBay. I'm just going to put it on eBay for like 50 pence because I only bought it for like 25 pence. £18 it sold for. I tell you,
I've still got mine. I didn't know it was that much.
Sought after. I tell you what, you want to keep hold of that.
I am.
Anyway, fantastic. Thank you for coming on. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Steve.
Pleasure.
I'm definitely we're gonna get some sorted and get you back because this is great. This is an excellent chat, and I hope all the listeners enjoyed it because as much as I did. And all I can say is thanks for listening. And I'll see you on the next episode.